The echo of a three-ring decree. A countdown to an inevitable self-destruct protocol. 2 in the morning. The witching hour for those who clean up the underworld's mechanical failures. It always rings exactly 3 times. The universal signal that someone else has been sent offline. 8 months is the average lifespan here, before the operative simply ceases to function entirely. The voice on the line is absolute. It demands the immediate delivery of the Phase 3 solution. There is no room for hesitation. Only the cold, calculated arithmetic of erasing biological variables. Highly unstable compounds, designed specifically to reduce complex organic structures down to a simple rust-colored fluid. You do not bring your soul to this job. You leave it locked in the dark. The city sleeps, blissfully unaware of the silent ghosts actively maintaining the fragile illusion of order. The transit is a temporary purgatory, a brief corridor between the silence and the upcoming chaos. The internal rhythm remains locked. 60 beats per minute. Not a single fluctuation in the system. Opulence often hides the most severe structural failures. A gilded cage requires constant aggressive maintenance. The exterior defenses are absolute, but the real threats always manage to manifest from the inside. The blinding lights serve a purpose. They attempt to sanitize a reality that cannot be washed away. Perfection is easily shattered. All it takes is one miscalculated variable to ruin the entire design. Behind this threshold lies the collapse, the raw consequence of someone stepping out of their lane. The atmosphere immediately shifts. The heavy scent of iron violently clashes with expensive imported cologne. The red toll has been collected, a permanent stain on the fabric of their pristine empire. No longer a threat, just an empty vessel waiting to be scrubbed from the historical record. The protocol initiates now, breaking down the complex failure into simple, manageable, and highly disposable components. The Phase 3 solution is highly efficient. It erases structural mistakes with absolute prejudice. Biological reality turns to liquid rust. The evidence of failure simply melts into the floorboards. The smell would break a normal mind. Here, it is just another Tuesday night. Total chaos unfolds on the floor, yet the internal system remains locked at 60. You must find every fragmented piece. The syndicate does not tolerate loose threads. An anomaly in the debris field. A tiny variable that escaped the primary collapse. A simple piece of metal, but it carries a massive, uncalculated psychological weight. A ghost from the past surfaces. The mechanical mind struggles to process the unexpected data. You isolate the virus. You lock it away before it corrupts the primary system. The erasure must be precise. You leave nothing behind, not even the chemical footprint. The reaction is forcibly stabilized. The biological remnants are fully converted into inert material. A complete structural reset. The canvas is wiped clean, leaving only a cold void. The final extraction protocol begins, siphoning away the last traces of a shattered existence. A flawless operation. The architecture remains completely unharmed, while the variable is entirely deleted. The signal is sent, a silent confirmation that the mess has been successfully contained. The tools of the trade go back into the dark, ready for the next inevitable failure. An absolute absence of evidence. The perfect vacuum required by the unseen ruling class. The job is done. The mechanism retreats back into the shadows where it belongs. Silence is the universal currency here. We are just gears turning in the quiet dark. Physical containment is easy. It is the mental residue that proves impossible to wash away. The physical extraction is complete. Now begins the silent, agonizing descent into the psychological void. The world outside is completely indifferent, a sprawling concrete maze hiding countless mechanical failures. The transition zone, a few stolen seconds of absolute silence before the haunting truly begins. Returning to the cell, a prison constructed entirely from classified secrets and dissolved organic variables. The internal machinery is exhausted. Even a rigid system eventually requires a hard, violent reset. The decontamination process is not optional. The psychological residue must be violently scrubbed away. The smell never truly washes out. It permanently fuses with the internal olfactory system. Shedding the armor reveals nothing but a hollow core, a completely empty, exhausted vessel. Normal soap cannot dissolve the guilt. It requires a much more abrasive mechanical intervention. The physical pain is a distraction, a highly necessary override for the failing central processor. You try to forcefully erase the stains, but the unseen corrosion goes straight to the bone. The surface is stripped entirely raw. Yet the internal corruption remains completely untouched and active. You look for a sliver of humanity. You only find dead circuitry and empty space. The physical cleanse is a complete failure. The phantom weight still crushes the skeletal structure. The anomaly demands processing, a microscopic variable that threatens to collapse the entire mental mainframe. It belongs to the lost timeline, a timeline permanently erased by the strict operational mandate. They evacuated the hazardous zone, leaving behind only static memories and hollow, echoing architecture. The sleep mode is permanently disabled. The dark processor runs an endless loop of collateral damage. You close your eyes, but the chemical reaction continues burning aggressively behind your retinas. The perfect machine cracks. The internal rhythm finally loses its absolute grip on the dark. The physical exhaustion is absolute, yet the dark processor refuses to initiate the shutdown sequence. The ghosts do not wait for permission. They breach the firewall of the conscious mind. Time becomes a hostile element. Every passing minute grinds heavily against the failing internal gears. It is impossible to calculate the exact origin point of this massive structural system failure. You seek out mechanical routines to desperately anchor the spiraling logic of a fractured reality. The missing variable screams louder than any explosion. The lost air left a permanent void. Collateral damage is rarely immediate. It slowly rots the foundations until the entire structure collapses. The internal containment fields are buckling. The emotional overflow threatens to drown the logical operator. Action is the only known countermeasure. If the mind drifts, the dark completely swallows you. Seeking patterns in the endless digital void. Looking for logic where only raw chaos exists. We are reduced to mere lines of code. Zeros and ones dictating who remains online. The mechanical shell fractures violently. The pressure of the unspoken truth demands a physical release. The system error escalates rapidly. The internal rhythm is officially compromised by the ghost code. The city offers zero comfort. It is just an infinitely larger cage of dissolving variables. You look out to escape, but the reflective void forces you to face the emptiness. The storm outside is loud, but the absolute silence inside is far more aggressively destructive, isolating the toxic anomaly. Hoping distance will stop the aggressive spread of the mental corruption. Retreating to the primary charging station. But the internal battery refuses to accept the current. The machine attempts to weep, but the tear ducts were permanently severed during basic training. The phantom rings echo endlessly. The master protocol is broken, but the hardware cannot quit. Waiting for the digital master to pull the invisible strings. A marionette built for violent erasure. Kinetic energy builds rapidly. The central processor cannot resolve the fatal error introduced by the anomaly. The smallest fragment of a destroyed timeline. A heavy anchor dragging the operator into the abyss. The olfactory sensors are permanently corrupted. The violent chemical reaction never truly stops burning the mind. Seeking equilibrium in the very place where the physical shell was brutally stripped and violently scrubbed. A desperate thermal shock to restart the frozen hardware. But the internal system remains critically unresponsive. Hallucinations overwrite reality. The dark stains from the operational grid bleed seamlessly into the private sanctuary. Paranoia floods the primary mainframe. The operator becomes the hunted inside his own fortified concrete vault. When the psychological defenses fail completely, you default entirely to raw, unforgiving mechanical and tactical routines. A tool designed strictly for permanent neutralization. A heavy object of absolute certainty in chaotic times. Muscle memory takes absolute control, disassembling the violent hardware to forcefully reassemble the shattered human operator. An anatomy of violent efficiency. Simple, cold parts that combine to forcefully close the final door. Cleaning the weapon is an illusion. The real dirt is permanently etched into the spiritual framework. The mechanical reset is loud and unforgiving, a stark reminder of the harsh, unyielding operational boundaries. The internal rhythm violently escalates. The highly calibrated machine is rapidly losing all structural and functional integrity. Every physical action burns massive reserves. The completely hollow shell is rapidly approaching a total shutdown. Two instruments of absolute compliance. One dictates the harsh orders, the other executes the permanent silence. The structural fatigue is absolutely critical. The phantom weight of dissolved variables violently crushes the operator. Sleep is entirely impossible. The dark processor endlessly renders the rust-colored fluid and the screaming silence. You build the armor back up, preparing the empty vessel for the next inevitable, aggressive deployment. The physical armor is completely secured, but the internal psychological defenses remain fatally compromised. The highly calibrated machine rapidly loses control. The internal panic violently overrides the central protocol. A massive, localized system failure. The biological engine races aggressively toward a catastrophic structural collapse. The confined space becomes a lethal pressure chamber. The corrupted oxygen aggressively burns the lungs. The freezing rain offers temporary physical relief, a violent shock to ground the spiraling mind. Looking down into the endless, dark grid. A sprawling factory constantly producing broken biological variables. Millions of unseen collisions happening every second, a perfect mirror of the internal mental chaos. Pain is the final tether to reality. When you feel nothing, you artificially manufacture friction. The exhausted engine rapidly vents the immense internal pressure. But the core temperature remains critical. A microscopic acoustic trigger. The broken machine immediately reboots into an aggressive, highly lethal posture. The physical combat routine fires blindly, searching aggressively for a lethal tool left heavily behind. The primary instrument of erasure is absent. The operator is completely exposed to the dark. The perceived threat dissolves instantly, leaving behind only a massive, exhausting spike of useless adrenaline. Retreating back into the heavily fortified cell. The external threats are nothing compared to the internal. The heavy cycle continues to spin rapidly. The exhausted operator stands violently trapped in the center. The magnetic pull of the corrupted variable is absolute. It violently rejects the total erasure protocol. A tiny, heavy piece of metal. It contains enough destructive mass to collapse the entire system. You bury the radioactive memory right next to the failing core. A guaranteed slow structural collapse, returning to the digital void, seeking highly encrypted distractions to forcefully drown out the loud silence. A massive catalog of dissolved architecture. Every single file heavily reinforces the brutal, inevitable final outcome. The digital graveyard is completely silent, but the erased variables scream endlessly in the background. You dig through the sterile data, looking aggressively for the exact moment the soul fractured. The syndicate dictates the rules. Every shattered piece of architecture is heavily stamped as acceptable. The truth is absolutely toxic. Reading the cold directives rapidly accelerates the total internal failure. The suffocating phantom atmosphere returns aggressively. The heavily corrupted engine violently gasps for clean air. The invincible operator finally hits the floor. The heavy structural integrity is completely compromised now. The foundation completely gives way. Gravity violently reclaims the broken vessel in the dark room. You try to physically crush the thoughts, but the internal corruption easily bypasses the firewall. The internal metronome is utterly destroyed. The heavily engineered 60 beats per minute is dead. The broken hardware stubbornly refuses to quit. It blindly seeks the absolute center of control, holding the heavy instrument of erasure. A desperate attempt to artificially command the chaotic environment. The tactical programming violently misfires, aggressively targeting completely empty space in a completely secure vault. A dark, endless tunnel of permanent silence. It violently promises a highly efficient, absolute resolution. The phantom targets simply evaporate, leaving behind only the devastating reality of total, crushing isolation. The reflective void confirms the massive internal damage. The original human blueprint is completely gone. Seeking a violent physical connection with the ghost in the glass, the circuit remains broken. You forcefully reject the corrupted image, but you cannot simply uninstall the horrifying internal reality. The biological battery finally hits critical low. The massive structural collapse is rapidly pulling him under. The heavy tool rests perfectly on the broken chest. A terrifyingly calm, completely violent mechanical embrace. The forced shutdown sequence violently begins, dragging the completely broken operator deep into the toxic dark. The dark processor violently reboots. The temporary system sleep offered absolutely zero structural recovery. Every ticking minute heavily grinds the decaying internal gears into absolute, permanent dust. The heavy instrument of erasure falls away, but the psychological weight remains completely attached. The corrupted code demands a visual confirmation, checking the hardware for fatal structural cracks. You stare into the void. The void stares back with the eyes of a completely broken machine. The human blueprint is permanently deleted. Only cold, twisted steel and heavy shadows remain. The final diagnostic is complete. The biological operator is offline. The machine takes permanent control. The heavy cycle violently resets. The invisible master violently pulls the dark strings once again. The three-ring decree begins. A new set of dissolved variables desperately requires immediate mechanical erasure. The personal nightmare ends. The professional erasure protocol aggressively overwrites the failing internal system. The internal rhythm violently flatlines back to normal. 60 beats per minute. Absolute, terrifying zero. The first ring confirms the target. Another structural failure requires aggressive, immediate chemical stabilization. The second ring locks the coordinates. The dark factory never completely stops heavily churning. The corrupted anomaly is permanently buried. The dark gears aggressively grind it into absolute nothingness. The third ring is silenced. The heavy connection is forcefully established with the dark void. The voice on the line delivers the cold variables. The mechanical shell simply silently accepts. The cycle violently demands fresh rust. The heavy tools are forcefully deployed once again. You permanently lock the soul away. You become nothing but a cold, highly efficient function. The machine violently marches back into the dark. The structural maintenance is entirely never-ending. The system never sleeps. Hit subscribe and prepare to heavily step into the absolute void.